Good morning. Good morning. Kins 4510, 4510, I forget. So I wanted to take a break from kind of overloading you guys with all the anatomy and physiology and switch over to talking about your literature review, which is your first major project for the semester. About half of you have had me before, so you guys should have a general idea of how I approach writing and specifically literature reviews. But if you haven't had me, this should be very valuable. But regardless, I am going to ask you Edpuzzle questions at the end of this. So make sure you are taking notes. I think by asking you quiz questions on this literature review that you're going to have, it really makes you accountable. There was too many times in projects, whether it was last semester or a year ago, students were just handing me what I would call unacceptable work, and I was definitely too lenient. From simple, like the very simple things of just not including enough sources, to other simple things like not having a cover page, which is what APA requires, to not alphabetizing your references. All of these things should be covered, and by making this video and putting it in a quiz format, you guys all should know the requirements when this is due. And this is due in about 4 weeks, I think. You'll find it in your syllabus. I want to say it's due March 17th, but I'm not quite sure off the top of my head. So creating a literature review, step one is identifying a topic. And all of you guys should have already done that and posted that to the discussion board at this point. However, while you're still identifying a topic, it's okay to switch topics in the next few days, week and a half, if you absolutely must. And I say that because sometimes students just pick a topic before they actually dive into the research, whether it's Google Scholar or some sort of research database, and they realize that A, there might be not a lot of research on your topic, or B, as you're reading the research, you just don't seem that interested. So the first thing you have to do when identifying a topic is pick something that interests you, that piques your interest. We're all in this class, we're all studying kinesiology, but maybe some of you guys plan on going to med school. Maybe some of you want to go to become a DPT, right? In that case, you should be looking at some sort of medical or rehab topic. Remember, I said you're not limited to the topics that I provided for you. You can pick anything as long as I just approve it. And I'm pretty open about that. Are you interested in nutrition? Are you interested in more of the applied world of performance? Are you interested in more specific sports, right? These papers or these literature reviews can be as in-depth about certain topics as you want them to be. But you have to pick something that you are interested in, because it'll just make for a much better paper and you'll enjoy actually writing it. So we've got these general topics. Then we need to convert these topics to a more specific topic in which we should write out a preliminary research statement. In this case, a problem. So what I have here, right, as you guys, some of you guys should know, I'm in the process of finishing my dissertation. Right now I've got about 50 pages typed on a certain topic, right? And this is my general problem with my topic, right? My general problem, if you have taken KINS 4520, is that percentage-based programming may inappropriately apply load because of inter-individual differences. So I have a problem statement, pretty much exactly what I told you guys, a little shorter, written out. Identify your problem statement. What is the problem within your worlds, right? Whether you're looking at maximalism versus minimalism, what's the problem? If you're a proponent of minimalism, what's the problem with maximalism? If you're looking at fat oxidation, what's the problem with carbohydrate utilization? What is the problem? From there, you start your research. You want to connect it to a purpose statement. Connect your problem to a purpose statement, right? So this is an absolute mandatory requirement, and it just makes things much simpler, right? But it's a requirement, and you have to put this in your paper. You have to put something along these lines. It has to say, at the end of your introduction, the purpose of this paper is to explore X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z being the variables you're looking at. So if you're looking at, again, minimalism, the purpose of this paper is to explore the efficacy of running minimalism as compared to maximalism. The purpose of this paper is to explore periodization of endurance training. The Purpose, okay, you have to have that. It informs me, the reader, exactly what you are trying to explore or research throughout the rest of your paper. So once we finish the introduction, and then at the end of that introduction, you have your purpose statement, everything else within your paper should be devoted to aiding that purpose statement, to helping me, the reader, identify, right, what that purpose statement is exploring or anything along those lines. Okay, that's important. Everything else in the paper should be connected back to that purpose statement to some degree. So understanding claims and building evidence. So once you have a problem and a purpose statement, and this is a little bit of a fluid process where sometimes you're going to do a little bit of literature reviewing, searching the literature, and it's going to help you refine your problem and your purpose statement. Sometimes you might do that early, but once you have a more clear purpose statement, you have to review the literature, right? Understand the claims that authors are making. What are they telling you, right? And then these claims are going to serve as your building blocks for evidence, right? So if one author found that a 3 centimeter elevation, heel elevation, is the definition of minimalism, right? Maybe that's one of your claims. If you found that anything above a 3 centimeter heel elevation, enhances or increases the likelihood of injury, that is a claim, and that is evidence. Okay, so understand the claims that authors are making in papers, and then build your evidence. Okay. So when you're going and conducting a literature search, well, you guys should all have some keywords associated with your topic. Clearly, I've already used the word minimalism, periodization, fat oxidation as some keywords that you can start. And the simplest thing to do is start with Google Scholar. So go to Google Scholar and just type these words and try to link them to some other words. So like minimalism in running, all right, minimalism runners, periodization in triathletes, something along those lines. So identify those keywords for your topic. Now, this is a key trick I'm going to give you guys. So as you're reading a paper, let's just say I read this paper, right, which I did, right? This is on daily undulating periodization models, right? It starts with some introduction, and it gives me a basic definition of the definition of periodization, and then it gives me a reference number 5. Oftentimes throughout this paper, or any paper you're reading, is going to give you references, right? Go back to the references and look at what those papers are titled. If you think that paper is also very closely related to your topic, then you could start to pull up that paper. And this is how research starts to snowball, right? Where I'm going to check all these references as I'm reading. If I see that a reference seems to be related to my topic, I'm going to take a look at it, and then I'll pull up that paper. And then before you know it, you might have 5, 10, 15, 20 different papers related to your topic. Now, the next thing, before you start to analyze these, you're going to have different sections of your paper. And these sections are going to be based on different topics. So if we're talking about periodization, well, you got to have a general background and history of periodization. From there, maybe the physiology, right? If we're talking about endurance sports, the physiology of how periodization is superior to non-periodized program in endurance sports. But whatever, right? Organize all of your papers. So you guys should have at least 10 papers into certain piles. It might be 3 piles, it might be 4 piles, whatever it is. These piles should become your sections. So again, periodization might be background, one section and one pile of papers. Physiology might be one section and one pile of papers, and then I don't know, something else. Right? This is going to help you organize your paper into some coherent topics. Right? It just makes it much easier to read. And that kind of brings me, we were supposed to do a class activity, but as an asynchronous class, we can't really do it. So I don't know. I might write something out. I might not. You guys will say. Okay, so actually analyzing the literature. So first thing, if you guys haven't done much work with peer-reviewed research, first thing you have to do is you have to understand the difference between an opinion-based paper, a randomized control trial paper, a literature review, and a meta-analysis. So an opinion-based paper is just that. I wish I had one with me, but I do not have an opinion-based paper with me. It's usually the author kind of giving his informed opinion on a certain topic. It is most often not sometimes it's peer reviewed. I shouldn't say that. Sometimes it's not peer reviewed. And if it's peer reviewed, you can use it in your paper. But remember, they're not basing it, it's not an original experiment, okay? So an RCT, a randomized control trial, is really like the gold standard for experimental research, right? So, you know, this paper that Mike Zerdos wrote on periodization is a randomized control trial where they had one group assigned to one protocol, another group assigned to another protocol, and you know, they went through 6 weeks of training and they looked for significant differences at the end, pre and post test, whatever. That is the gold standard for experimental research. Some of you guys are going to need a lot of these RCTs, okay? The next step up from an RCT is a literature review. It's, in a sense, a much deeper variation of what you guys are doing. A literature review gathers, it's exactly what you guys are doing. It gathers all the research on a specific topic, and then they provide some scientific recommendations based on what all of the research says. And then finally, a meta-analysis is kind of the top tier, where it's what I'll call a super literature review. Except instead of just providing a recommendation, they actually provide a statistical analysis combining all the different studies they've gathered, and they can give you an actually evidence-based recommendation because it's done on statistics. You know, meta-analysis in many regards is held to the highest standard. But having said all of that, you guys should have maybe 1, 2, or 3 literature review and meta-analyses, and then the remainder of your research should come from experimental research, okay? So you can't just have 7, 8, 9 different literature reviews on a topic. I want you to go to the source, and that's the problem with literature reviews and meta-analyses. They're not the source, right? The RCTs, the experimental research papers, are the actual source, and you should have, this should be the bulk, right, of your references, RCTs and experimental research. All right, so I've said all that. Now, well, what happens when you actually read a paper? This can be overwhelming. You know, a paper can take 1.5 hours to read, 2 hours to read. You know, and you're supposed to read 10 of these, but you're supposed to use 10 of these, which means you're probably going to read 15 to 20, 25, 30 maybe. Well, you have to be more efficient at choosing what papers work best for you. And I wish I had somebody teach me this. I kind of was just thrown into a master's in exercise science where I didn't come from a science background. I came from a business background. And no one really taught me how to read research. The first step is read the title. Read the title. See if it seems somewhat related to your topic, right? If it seems somewhat related to your topic, a lot of people would say read the abstract. I don't personally like reading the abstract. I like to do this next. Then I'm going to next I'm going to look at the authors. It's important to note the authors because usually in your area, in your field, there's always a few key authors. If you see a name pop up that you recognize, right, be like, oh, maybe this is interesting because I saw him on 2 or 3 or 4 other different papers. So you'll see that very often. But the next big step is read the first and the last paragraph of the introduction. And then most importantly, when you're doing this, understand the purpose statement, right? Remember I said you guys have to have a purpose statement. Essentially, any paper that's worth anything will have a purpose statement, right? So Zerdos, right? It's the first sentence in the last paragraph on this paper. He writes, therefore, the primary aim of this study was to compare the effects of a modified periodization format with a weekly training order, yada, 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 to yada, 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 yada. So the purpose statement really tells you what the whole paper is about. So I think it's important to kind of read the first paragraph to get that basic understanding, and then that purpose statement. So as you're reading this, you're always asking, does this seem like it fits my topic? If it really fits, you're going to keep going to the next step. If it doesn't really fit, you can probably ignore it. If it's somewhere in between, read the first two paragraphs of the conclusion, right? Which will essentially they'll give you their findings. Okay, so read 1 to 2 paragraphs of the conclusion. And then finally, if those really seem to fit or seem to fit pretty well, start to read the entire paper. And I say this because you don't want to waste your time. Like, reading these are time consuming. You don't want to read 2 hours and then realize this doesn't really fit my topic. You know, you could do all of these steps in a matter of 15 minutes or less and decide whether or not the paper actually works with your topic. As you're reading the entire paper, highlight the points, right? Highlight the points within the paper that you think are particularly relevant, that, you know, if they write a sentence and it kind of strikes something with you, it piques your interest, right? That's probably going to pique somebody else's interest, right? Important data points, right? Like, whatever it is, highlight those with an actual highlighter or whatever it is. However, you kind of, whether you print it out or you do it on a computer nowadays, highlight those points. And those are points that can be used in your review, right? So part of what you have to do is not just completely regurgitating a study. So I said highlight some points, but you have to also think critically about what is being put forth, right? I don't want you guys to just be these robots just, you know, copying and pasting everything that comes from a study, or like the worst thing you could do is just copy and paste an abstract, right? Oftentimes, like, all research is flawed. There's no perfect research study, right? So you have to take a look at, well, what are some of the flaws within this study? Who are the participants? You know, if you're looking at triathletes and you're studying VO2 max in triathletes, but this study has untrained subjects while they're looking at VO2 max, it's not really a perfect fit with your topic. So you have to highlight these things. What's the sample size? You know, I put forth the Finney paper for the 1 or 2 students that are looking at fat oxidation in this class, right? And the Finney paper has a massive flaw. It only had 5 participants. Specifically, 1 participant really skewed the data, right? So is the sample size relatively large or small? Was there any protocol flaws? Is there any measurement flaws? You know, when looking at connecting back to strength and conditioning, how you assess hypertrophy or body composition varies. There's all sorts of methods, whether it's whether it's skinfold calipers, bod pod, or something else. You can't really compare those two perfectly because they're not the same measurement methods. And then finally, when you're critiquing the literature, and this should be within your paper, you have to start to compare things. How does it compare to other studies? Do not, in your literature review, do not just list, this study says this, this study says this, this study says this, this study says this. Do not just list. There needs to be some critical thinking, right? I need you to tell me, you know, why this is a strong study, why this might be a weak study, what are some flaws? Is this study in agreement with somebody else? Why are they in agreement? Why are they in disagreement? Okay, this is the analytical part of the paper, which is where the majority of your points are coming from. And your discussion/conclusion, right? Throughout the paper, you're interpreting things for sure, but you're wrapping up your major findings as you've summarized from the literature. Your take-home points. What are the take-home points? Now, I don't want you to say, my take-home points are, right? That's not how scientific writing is done. So you have to be non-direct with that. And then finally, your practical applications, where you should be able to finish this project and go into any conversation where somebody's talking about it and give them a general recommendation, right? I've given general recommendations on becoming fat adapted to endurance athletes because of my research at the master's level. You guys this is not very different. You should be doing something the same, where you should finish your project and feel very confident you can speak on it and provide practical recommendations. So what matters? The grading scale, right? This is what you guys probably care about. So it's going to be worth 100 points or 15% of your grade, really 15% of your grade. And then I'll just scale it up and down based on the points to 15% of your final grade. The introduction is very important to me. If you write a poor introduction, I'm not going to want to read your paper. So your introduction is worth 30%. And these are some key elements. Guys, I cannot reiterate enough. Use these next few slides as a checklist, right? This is your checklist. Make sure everything has all of these points and you'll do relatively well, right? All of this is assuming, you know, strong writing style, proper grammar, and all that good stuff, right? But a hook. Well, your paper should start with a hook. Catch my attention. Usually this is in the form of some story or statistic. Because you're doing some paper, it's actually more, because you're doing a paper and not a presentation, usually we use some sort of a statistic. So if we're connecting it to maximalism versus minimalism, talk about injury rates in runners. That's what, I'm sure there's stats out there. If we're talking about periodization, I don't know, talk about, you know, how many runners actually utilize some form of periodization. You know, I just wrote a big part of my paper on you know, the prevalence of periodization in resistance trained athletes. 96% of British powerlifters utilize some form of periodization. That's strong. That's a strong stat, right? It shows why periodization is important. So give me a hook that explains why your topic or why your paper is important. Okay, so 1 and 2 on here, which are each worth 5 points, are connected. Now, from there, you have to start to build and highlight the problem, right? If we're talking of, you know, whatever it is, build towards the problems, like explain blah, 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 thus something is happening, right? Thus we are uncertain as to the proper way to periodize training in endurance athletes, whatever it is. You know, the highlighting of the problem, right, and the building of the problem really should be backed by at least 1 to 2 key studies which kind of show that there's some sort of issue out there, okay? And then finally, what did I say? It's absolutely mandatory. You must finish off your introduction with a purpose statement, right? And the introduction should be 1 to 2 pages. You know, if it's just shy of a page, that might be enough, but it definitely should not be a paragraph, right? It shouldn't be like a 4 or 5 sentence paragraph. That is definitely not enough to get across all of these points. So your analysis is obviously the largest chunk of this, 60 points. Listen, you'll do very well by just simply bringing in at least 10 peer-reviewed articles. So literally, if you just have 10 references in your reference section, you're going to get 30 points on this. I mean, that's a lot, right? And remember, what are peer-reviewed articles? They should come from some sort of database, whether it's like this article is from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. This is from the Brazilian Journal of Physical Therapy, right? So what are non-peer-reviewed articles? Well, things that come straight from the internet. Things that are from books are not peer-reviewed. So like this book, while I utilize this book when I'm writing about, you know, resistance training or whatever it is, it wouldn't count towards a peer-reviewed reference. Now the question becomes, can you use non-peer-reviewed references? And my answer is absolutely. You can absolutely utilize other sources, whether it's books from experts, whether it's websites, but you have to have that minimum of 10 peer-reviewed. Okay. So a proper background, right? So really within the analysis section, it should probably start with some sort of proper background. So, you know, I gave you 2 examples here, whereas if you're studying maximalism, you should probably do some general explanation of running mechanics maybe. This is off the top of my head. If you think that there's other ways to give a proper, or to put maximalism and minimalism in proper context, do that, right? I think explaining running mechanics is a good starting point. You know, if you're studying periodization, maybe you want to give the history of periodization in running. Be careful, I already told you guys, if you're doing periodization, this should not be about lifting weights and resistance training. if you want to give me a quick rundown of Medvedev's explanation of periodization, that's fine. But from there, that background should be connected to endurance training or running, not weights. And then this section really should just, be proper segueing and integration, right? Does your paper make sense? I'm like, if you're going from one section to the next, is there proper segueing in between? Or does it seem kind of out of left field? If a topic seems out of left field, there'd be some sort of points that are probably taken off. Analyze both sides of the argument. Listen, there's research out there which always supports both sides. If we're talking about maximalism versus minimalism, it's out there, both sides. If we're talking about whether or not running is dangerous for the heart, it's absolutely out there for both sides, right? Remember, you're taking one side, right? You are taking one side and you're trying to prove your point. But in attempting to prove your point, you have to understand both sides of the argument. And then finally, the conclusion, right, which is, I already said, your practical application, your take-home points, yada, yada, yada. So there needs to be a conclusion section. Remember, these aren't just sections, right? The conclusion section is one, but the rest of these are just things that you're going to have to come up with the sections in between. Those are your piles I wrote of research. And then the last 10 points, pretty simple, just referencing. And, you guys have no idea how often people kind of just butcher this, whether it's having a title page or cover page, having a running head, having a page number, references. Use OWL Purdue. OWL Purdue is a website which gives you all of the basics on how to use APA. Okay? So I highly recommend that you use OWL Purdue when you have any questions about referencing. And then I think finally, the most important thing you can probably do is email me and say, hey, can we meet up to analyze X, Y, and Z about my paper? I just want to make sure I've got this covered. I am more than available to help you guys build a really strong paper, but you guys have to let me know if you need help. All right, hopefully this was helpful.